Hey guys, it's Warman. Welcome to War Reacts. In today's video, I'm going to be helping you decide what class you should play in Lord of the Rings Online: Echoes of Angmar. I'm going to be going through all of the classes and the races that can be played by them, and then I'm also going to be putting in my 2 cents on what race I think is best fit for the class you're playing based on lore. I'm also going to try my best to give you guys a rundown on what you can expect playing the class inside of the game, what your role is, and kind of like what your general day-to-day is going to be while you play this class. First up is the champion. So if you're looking to melee DPS, this would probably be my first pick. There are a few other classes that we'll get into later, but this would be my first pick if you're just looking to pump and do nothing other than DPS, because that's pretty much all these guys provide. I do believe they can off-tank in the later levels, but this is strictly off-tank. You're not going to be tanking any bosses. So since this is phase 1, I figured I would go over what to expect during your early levels to your journey to 24. You can expect to be kind of frustrated here. You are a melee class, and these old MMOs certainly drive home the fact that you're not very good, because they want to make your character miss and be parried and dodged and evaded. Almost every attack. There are some fights that last well into over a minute because you are just parried and evaded so frequently. It's almost comical. You almost want to record it and post it on the forums out of frustration that every single number that pops up on your screen is actually a dodge or evade. So definitely expect that in the early levels. It will get better later, but the early levels, it's pretty frustrating. So as far as the lore is concerned and what races I think fit champion, Lord of the Rings Online does a pretty good job. Hobbits don't really fit this very well. I know it'd be fun to play one in the game, but I don't think in the books or the movies any of the hobbits in the party really strike me as a champion. None of them are really somebody you'd want to send off into war for that purpose. So men, elves, and dwarves I think all equally deserve this. There's certainly several elves, dwarves, and men to look at for champion inspiration. Probably somebody like Isildur for the men, Elrond for the elves, and Gimli or any of the dwarves in the Hobbit, really, like Thorin Oakenshield or something. Those guys I would consider be champions, yeah, you can draw your inspiration from them. Up next is the Guardian. This is the second most popular class based on my poll. So the Guardian, of course, is going to be your tank. This is the only true tank specialization inside Lord of the Rings Online. Certainly a difficult one to play. Based on what the videos I'm seeing right now, they're having a very hard time holding aggro, and I've heard that this is kind of the case up until endgame. So it's going to be kind of a struggle bus as you level up to endgame. I'm sure it's going to be very rewarding once you're there, but definitely if you're thinking you're going to go and speed run the Great Barrows and hold all the aggro, you're going to be in for a rude awakening. Anyways, Guardians can be played by all of the races, and I think, once again, this is a good choice from Lord of the Rings Online because I can actually point to a Guardian of every race, at least based on what I'm seeing. Guardians in the MMO fashion, of course, are the people who take the damage, and they're usually the leader of the group, but from a lore perspective of Lord of the Rings Online, I don't really think that you're the leader of the party. I think you're just the most devoted to the party. You would really, your job is to protect them at all costs. So for the men, I would say Boromir is a good Guardian. He gave his life for the party. For the dwarves, I'd say Balin is a no-brainer. He's always there for Thorin and always supports his cause and goes wherever he needs to go. He even died in Moria because he led a party to Moria because he wanted to regain control. And for the hobbits, which I think is probably, believe it or not, the most lore-friendly one that I could think of, is Samwise. I think you can find no more devoted person in all of Middle-earth than Sam is to Frodo. So much so that you even see that in the gathering of Elrond, Sam actually snuck his way in because he doesn't want to leave Frodo's side. He's there to protect Frodo and doesn't want anything to happen to him. So in terms of a lore perspective, I think the Guardian is there to protect the party, not necessarily to be the leader and the king of the party, like they kind of are in other MMOs. So as far as my recommendation for race, I think you can pretty safely just choose any race here. They're all equally lore friendly, and you can certainly find different angles. I know that Sam is certainly quite a guardian to Frodo, but I know some people might not want to play such a small person, especially since it's not as story-based when you're going into raids and things like that. You're kind of expected to just go in and fight bosses. I don't think, Sam wasn't intentionally going to fight people. He would if he had to, right? But it's different in an MMO, so certainly take that for what it is, and make your choice based on these facts. Up next is the Burglar. This comes in at 16% of the player base so far. The Burglar is an interesting class. It is a melee DPS class, and it's the only class that can stealth, so there's certainly that going for you. The two races that can be Burglar are men and Hobbit. Now, I'm not super versed in Lord of the Rings lore, but as far as burglars are concerned, I can't really point to one that's a man, at least off the top of my head right now. I'm sure in the comments you guys will certainly tell me otherwise, but of course the most famous burglar of all time is a Hobbit, so if I were to make a recommendation, I think it's pretty much a no-brainer. You should go Hobbit here. This is probably the best thing that you could possibly be, the most lore-friendly Hobbit role you could be, especially as a combat role, right? You're not the highest melee DPS in the game, makes sense. You're very stealthy, very sneaky, undetectable by orcs and stupid goblins and things. Yep, checks out. You debuff, you really help the party out in other ways by like helping the champions do more damage, or making it so the mobs deal less damage to the Guardian. Just a great overall class, I think, perfectly fit for a Hobbit. Of course, a man can be one too. I don't think there's anything in their lore. Dwarves, don't know much about that, why they wouldn't be a burglar. And elves, I just don't think it's in them. There's no capacity in elves. I don't see them as burglars or sneaks or anything like that. So for your low-level journey, you can expect to be missed, dodged, parried, evaded constantly. Same problem as the champion. You have to do a lot more work to load your damage into a mob, such as going stealth and walking very slowly. You are more positionally based. You have to be behind the target. So it's a little more cumbersome, but the damage is still there. I was doing okay damage on my burglar. Certainly not as much as my champion, and definitely not as easily as my champion. If I didn't miss any of my core abilities on the burglar, it felt good, but if you started missing any of your bleed abilities or your stealth openers, it was just dreadfully slow. Alright, up next is the Captain. The Captain is an easy one. It can only be played by the race of man. The Captain is a really cool class, and I can see why it's a little more popular today than it was back in the original Lord of the Rings Online, because I think people didn't really understand its true power. I would say this is probably one of the better solo classes, at least from what I'm seeing in low level. You've got really decent, okay damage. I know that changes at endgame, but for now the damage is okay, and the healing is pretty substantial, and with the pets and the buffs you provide, I'm finding soloing on a Captain seems to be probably one of the more enjoyable classes to do it on. So as far as the lore is concerned, who would I consider to be a captain? These are people who I think inspire the group, almost like a minstrel in a way. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I think Aragorn would be considered a captain, somebody I would consider a captain, because you see it in the first books a lot, that the hobbits really enjoy being around him. The group really enjoys having him there, right? He kind of inspires them, just his presence. When they're in Rivendell and Frodo finds out that Aragorn's coming, he said, hey, I would have begged you to come, right? This is somebody you want in your party, and somebody you trust, and you just want there to bolster everybody else, and also provide everything you need, essentially. He's perfect for scouting the roads. He's perfect for healing minor wounds. He's great in combat, and he's good at rallying people together, and people want to fight for him. So I think captains are really, really good. And yeah, I guess play a man, because it's the only one you can play. So have fun playing your captain. All right, up next is the Lore Master. They're coming in at 11.86% of the player base. These guys are ranged DPS. They're primarily designated to crowd control. I would say that they're probably one of the more enjoyable solo classes. They have a pet. They can do some self-healing. They have some pretty significant crowd control, and the damage isn't bad. The benefit to these guys, of course, is they don't suffer as much from the miss, parry, dodge as the melee and the physical DPS do, because they're casting spells. So you only really have one chance of being resisted, and that's about it. So the damage early game is actually pretty high comparatively to the other physical DPS. So this is a pretty strong draw to a lot of people. They're also really good to have in groups because crowd control in Echoes of Angmar is kind of important. The mobs and, like we said before, the aggro is kind of crazy. So any crowd control you can bring. I'm sure these guys are probably slept on, I'd imagine. I would pretty much always want one in my group because their crowd control is so strong and the DPS is so low. So at least early game, I would say these guys are probably like A tier. Anyways, let's talk about the classes, or the races that can play this class. You've got Man and you have Elf. The first thing I want to get out of the way is, obviously, this is supposed to be the Gandalf sort of class. Like, you're supposed to look to Gandalf for inspiration here. The only problem here, of course, if you know anything about Gandalf, is he is a Maiar, which means he's not really a man. He is a man, right? He is a mortal man. He's a Maiar that was sent down in a mortal man's body. So he can die, he can be slain. But his power doesn't come from being a lore master. His power comes from being a Maiar, and the gods, I forget what they're called, who sent him down, kind of reduced his power a whole bunch, because he wasn't supposed to be down in Middle-earth to, lay waste or rule the free people. He was supposed to just kind of guide them to freedom. Same with all the other wizards, by the way. I'm not going to get into the lore here. But essentially, yeah, he's not strong because he's a lore master. He's strong because he's like a demigod, essentially. And also, he has a ring of power. Let's not forget he's wearing one on his hand, one of the elven rings of power. So it's hard to draw inspiration from Gandalf, but there's nobody else really to draw inspiration from. If you wanted to pick like what race I think would best fit the lore master, I honestly think it would be elves. Elves strike me as pretty wise. They seems like even the most common elf is very wise because they're so aged. They know just about everything there is. They have giant, massive libraries. They're just very witty and clever, and they really kind of strike me as somebody who would be a lore master. Obviously, men can be as well, but for lore purposes, I would say an elf really fits that description pretty highly. So if you're looking to lore master, maybe go elf. So enjoy lore master if you do choose it. Up next, we have the Minstrel, coming in at 10.17%. These guys are the only true designated healer in Lord of the Rings Online. So if you're looking to heal, you're going to be a Minstrel. So let's talk about the Minstrel a little bit. Let's talk about what your day-to-day looks like. Honestly, in the beginning levels, up to 24 in Phase 1, you're going to be very strong. You have a lot of abilities that you can cast while moving. They hit pretty hard. You have a lot of, you have like a long cast followed by an instant cast, and the burst damage is pretty high because, once again, just like the Lore Master, you don't have to worry about dodge, miss, parry, evade. This is out the window for you. On top of that, you can pretty much heal yourself to full in one heal, and you're a very needed person in a group. It's almost necessary to have you in every single fellowship that forms. So if you decide to play a minstrel, you're gonna be just elated because everybody's gonna want you in their group. Your damage is actually gonna be pretty much better, if not on par with every other DPS class, which, by the way, can't heal themselves. Sorry, they're pretty overpowered, at least right now. And I think they're slept on. I think a lot of people might not want to pick one up, but they're pretty strong. So if you're looking at Phase 1, you're looking to blow through it. And if you're looking for a decent solo class, the Minstrel. Let's talk about the races that can play, that can be a Minstrel. It can be man, dwarf, hobbit, elf. Everybody can be a minstrel, which is cool. Makes sense because, you're kind of just playing the guitar and inspiring people. In my opinion, once again, just like the Lore Master, I think the elf makes the most sense here, at least from the books and the lore standpoint. In the Fellowship of the Ring, when the hobbits get to Rivendell, most of them fall asleep immediately because of the music. The music there is it's got such a spell about it. It's so enchanting that they can't help but fall asleep at the dinner table. And Bilbo talks to Frodo about this and says, my first couple years here, it was hard to stay awake, So I think just based on what I've heard there, I think the elf is obviously, the most lore friendly choice. Right? Not that the men can't inspire, not that the hobbits can't inspire. It's just we see it more in the elven realm, and I feel like the lore master and minstrel are kind of an elf race, in my opinion. But you know, take it with a grain of salt, and you know, hobbit minstrels are cool as hell. So do what you're gonna do. And last, but very surprisingly least, is coming in at 9.32% is the hunter. Very shocking. Very shocking. I would have expected this class to be pretty much the top choice by everybody. A, because it's the bow and arrow class, which is emulative of Legolas, and B, it's the strongest, by far the strongest single target DPS in the game. Will these numbers change? I think so. Right now, because we're locked into Phase 1, hunters are pretty boring. They're pretty plain. There's not a lot of single target bosses we're going to be fighting. Usually there's rooms of bosses or rooms of high-level elites where a champion might be better. Also, the hunter, in my opinion, pretty boring. I think it's probably one of the most uninspired classes of the game. While it's strong and you get a lot of cool things, it just doesn't feel as cool as you want it to feel. It just feels kind of basic, and the rotations, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I can't get into the hunter. I think this will be the one class that I really don't play much of. But if you do play the hunter, just keep in mind it's currently the lowest populated class based on my straw poll. You're almost guaranteed a group, because come endgame, you know, we're gonna have like 20 people in a group, so we're going to need a lot of hunters, and not a lot of people are playing them. So pretty weird scenario to be in. Usually the high DPS classes are the most popular, but the Lord of the Rings community is a cool group of people, and DPS is not king here. The game just plays so much differently. Anyways, let's talk about the races that can be hunters. Every one of them. Again, just like the minstrel, you can be a hobbit, dwarf, man, or elf. So, at least I think you can be a man. Okay, just logged in, confirmed. Yes, you can be a man. I guess I just don't see a lot of men hunters. I see pretty much every race except man. Maybe that's just subjective, personal observation, but take that for what it is. So let's talk about lore-friendly races to play as hunters. I don't think it's unreasonable for anybody to be a hunter at a very base level. Obviously, Legolas and pretty much every one of the elves, you know, they're just archers through and through. It's a very elf class. Again, I know this is 3 elves I've recommended in a row, but I mean, come on, right? I don't know. Men can be archers, dwarves can be archers. You see that, you know. Keely and Feely, like, they're both archers in The Hobbit, at least in the movies. It's, you know, obviously it's just a bow and arrow, and any race can equip them. It's so prevalent in the elven realm that you just feel drawn towards an elf hunter. Hobbit hunters are fun. I think they're the most probably unrealistic one. Not that hobbits can't hunt. I know that, you know, they can be a hunter, quote unquote hunter, but I guess I'm coming at this with the viewpoint of you're going into a combat role, not a hunting role, right? So, like, yeah, a hobbit can be a hunter, but is a hobbit going to be an aggressor, an archer who's also an aggressor? It just doesn't fit with me as well. So I think hobbits are probably the least likely, and I was kind of surprised that they could be hunters, to be quite honest. But, you know, once again, it is an MMO. You have to give some race, you know, the Hobbit would have like 2 classes to choose from, and it would just kind of not feel good in an MMO setting. So they have to give them something. So I'm not mad about it. I just think it's not the most realistic choice as far as token lore is concerned. But if you think otherwise, definitely let me know in the comments. Anyways, guys, that's the video. I hope this was helpful. I've just noticed there's not a lot of Echoes of Angmar content on YouTube, and I've kind of been itching for some, so I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll provide the world with some of that. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being mean. Anyways, guys, have a good one.